Well, welcome to Mistakes or Us. First mistake was taking this in for work. This is a gas Son of Ampzilla. I think these are about 80 watts a side. And this is probably built in the 70s. It's kind of a discrete, well, yeah, it's pretty much all discrete. There's one, I'm going to call it an IC or a chip. And the rest of it's all discrete components. This thing's got me scratching my head. Actually, I got this, I didn't get a report what the problem was. So I went about merrily testing it. And let me put its clothes back on a little bit so you can see what it really looks like. This is one of the reasons I don't actively seek out solid state amps. They're very fiddly sometimes. This one appears to be no exception. And that's okay. Everybody's got their own gig. One of the reasons I don't like working on these is they get pretty tight and you've got to start taking a bunch of stuff apart to work on them. And this one, no different. To get to the components, I took the lid off, no big deal. But to get to this circuit board, let me make sure this baby's off. And we'll just unplug it to make sure it's really off. I'm having trouble. I didn't get a report as to what's wrong with this. And this side appears to be distorted. What's weird is I plugged this in, brought it up real carefully. It seemed fine. I put a speaker on it and then plugged an audio source into it, and you couldn't hear anything at all until you started driving it hard, the input. And then you could get some distortion, you get a little bit of noise. Okay, I checked the power supply, did some basic stuff. And I thought, well, maybe I'll luck out and maybe the output transistors, one side is dead or blown or something. So I took them off, and you can do that with the heat sink on. This actually has two heat sinks. This side is gone. It normally would sit here. Anywho, no such luck. And even to be doubly safe, I took a transistor out of the working side, tested both sides. This side they call the B channel over here. This is the A. Just played stare and compare. The transistors seemed fine. And I was kind of poking around and looking, and I hunted down a schematic. And I'm just looking, giving it a visual, see if there's anything obvious. Didn't see anything right away. And I had my audio source plugged into the thing and shut it off. And I was getting ready to retire for the evening. And I thought, well, I'll try one more thing. Just one more thing. It's usually how repairs are. One more thing. So when I brought it back up, it played fine a little. And then gradually faded away. Which I thought was very odd. So I studied the schematic a little bit, went to bed, and this morning I'm over here, and I believe, this is a little hazy, but I'm getting the gist of it. There really are only 4 controls in here. There's 2 protection circuit adjustment controls. There's a bias control, which is buried way over here. You can just barely see the tip of it, I think. It's under this kludgy cap. And then this control here, and this is the DC offset control. It controls the feedback circuit. Anyway, I was measuring. One good thing about stereo power amps is if you have a side that's damaged or not working, and the other side works, you can play stereo and compare. It's great. So I'm, playing stereo and compare. And this control seems to be off a bit. And what's really caught my eye was this. Looks like at the factory, when they built this, somebody lined it all up, and then they took a marker and drew across there the way that the screwdriver setting was set. Here, this one is correct. This one is not. It's like this. Well, it was more this way. And I tinkered with that control real carefully. I measured the voltage, and it seemed off. And I fiddled with it a little bit. And I noticed that if I turned it more clockwise, that the audio straightened up. but the value that that pot was, or the value of the voltage is supposed to be there, was really off. So it's really weird. And I got to looking at some driver voltages and stuff, and there's just, the voltages are off. It's not being driven, the transistors aren't being driven into conduction. And the other thing I noticed is I checked the bias on this, and you can do that. What I've been doing is I've been checking it from the center, or the positive lead, through one of the emitter resistors. And my best reconnaissance is this ought to be about 30 milliamps, and there is absolutely no current being drawn, hardly at all. And unfortunately, well, here's where maybe the screw-ups come. I haven't decided yet. I'm not making any progress anyway. I thought maybe this transistor, or this this looks like an integrated circuit. It's actually an array of about 4 transistors, from what I understand. One of the little bugaboos about this amp is that all the parts are labeled with house numbers. This just says whatever. So I couldn't find any good hard information about that IC, and there basically is this IC, a pot, and this adjusts the voltage. And I did a little snooping on the internet, since I'm unfamiliar with this unit, and read a couple horrifying stories that say basically this IC likes to blow out. I thought, oh, that's not cool. So what I did was I took, and there are a lot of screws on these heat sinks. This thing is kind of a bathtub. The back, the bottom, and the front are kind of a big U shape. The sides with these heat sinks are bolted on, and then this front is held on. Well, there's a few little tricks to all this I'm going to show you. I'm doing this to kind of help somebody else, the next poor schmuck that takes this apart. Here's the heat sink, and it sits in there like this. Now, that board sort of sits on top of it, but there is an army of screws that you got to take loose. All these across the top hold the lid on. All these across the bottom hold the heatsink onto the bottom. There's 3 on each side that the top 2 hold the heatsink onto the front and the back, but these middle 2, or you can see my finger peeking in and out of the hole, hold the top circuit board. There actually are 2 circuit boards here. There are little tabs here where I believe these are the driver transistors, and probably I believe the cutoff transistors, the protection transistors. They kind of hold that on there, and this all fits. There's a little notch there. Another sting in the tail is these transistors go through there, and they kind of hold that board onto there. And you can actually separate these 2 boards, but there's a lot of wiring that holds this all together. It's a little fiddly. And like I said, I've been looking at the obvious stuff. Nothing right off the bat. So I went down this road thinking this IC was bad, or this integrated circuit. So I went ahead and took it up, and I took all this stuff loose on the other side. And here's another little sting in the tail I just thought I would mention. When you go to taking this thing apart, keep track of the screws. They're not the same size. There's no reason to fiddle with those screws. All they do is go through these inserts, which is right there, and hold these formed heat sinks. This is a bent metal heat sink. It's not a cast or extruded heat sink. I don't know if that helps you or not. If it does, fine. Anyway, those transistors are held in there. There's a little protection cap over each one, and somebody kindly put a little point in there, or hole in there, so you can poke a test probe in there and see what the voltage on the collector is. But the sting in the tail there is the way that this cap is designed, and the way that these screws are put together. They've taken the time to annoyingly put 2 lock washers on there, and what they're doing is they're using that washer as a spacer to make up the difference for the thickness of this little cap. So if you think that somebody screwed up, you get to putting this back together, basically this won't tighten down all the way. It will if you force it, but they're kind of using the two lock washers to get and make contact there, and make contact on the case of that transistor. It's a kind of annoying little trick. So, and those washers are very fiddly. You know, when you take them out, one falls off, the other mysteriously stays inside the case, so you don't see this right away. At least I didn't. It took me a little bit to figure out what was going on, so be real careful that I'm just warning you ahead of time. And the other thing too is that this little transistor array has heatsink dope on it, and it sits up against the bottom of this. And there's some different versions of this board apparently too. I need to look into that further. And if you're watching this and you have experience in this and you're laughing your butt off and I haven't fixed this yet, I would appreciate some input on this. This has got me scratching my head a little bit. So anyway, I took this out, swapped it over there, took all those screws out, and nothing. Well, it told me that this wasn't bad. I was happy but sad. This isn't damaged. And there are two different versions of this. There's like a, that's interesting. That other side didn't, well, apparently this is a Motorola transistor. It actually says gas on it, but it's a 100A. There's a 100A and a 100 version. And I don't know if that goes with the boards or what the deal is here. I've been trying to do some reading, and the information I found is it's disjointed because people are working on different issues. So anyway, while I took this all apart, this is very, I don't know, annoying. And I stuck some paper under here. It's like paper towel to keep it from shorting out. And I thought it'd be a good egg. And this is the power supply board. There are 5 circuit boards in here. There's kind of a preamp driver board, and then there's the actual output stage, and then this power supply board. This is a diff power supply, bipolar for lack of a better word. So buried under here are fuses. They're 8 amp, and this thing has 3 power supplies. There's a 44 volt, 50 volt, and 27 volt, I believe. I need to do some more research and see what's going on. The low voltage, the 27 volt power supply, or 28 volt, are these little blue, these are little Zener diodes, and it really doesn't do a terrible lot. So I thought, and just off the cuff, I didn't explore it, this is my fault, I took these 2 fuses loose. I flipped them up, thinking I was going to cut the power off to this board. And then I merrily went about my way over here. I replaced all that stuff and kind of had to kludge it back together. I didn't feel comfortable running the thing without the stuff because I didn't know what was going to happen. This is one of my little pet issues where things can happen real quick in DC coupled amps, and mistakes can be made, and there's a lot of crying and parts are blowing up left and right, at least for me. So I did that, and it worked. The transistor didn't change anything. No big deal. So I thought, well, I'd put it back together. And just for fun, I measured the DC offset on the output. And it was like at a volt. And I thought, well, that wasn't that way when I started. And I thought, oh great, I screwed something up. So I've been over here fiddling around and adjusting things and fiddling with the bias current, and was thinking, what the hell had I done wrong? I even took the transistors all out. It was such a low voltage, it threw me. And I cleaned all the legs. I thought maybe I contaminated the leg of one and it was doing something funky. And whenever I turned it on, it made out this little belchy chirp noise, kind of what? And the other thing that threw me too was these have a little output meter. There was like a standing voltage there. So it told me that there was something going on, and that DC voltage was showing up on that power meter. So I've tried my best to figure out what I had screwed up, and what was I doing? I was over here, and I thought, okay, this is a positive voltage, so it's coming from the positive side of the amp. So something's got to be out of kilt, and I measured the collector on the drivers, This one's negative over here, if I remember correctly, and this one's positive. And there was no voltage there. And I thought, well, what the heck? Did I touch something or blow something up? Or I thought, okay, I haven't driven all the screws back in here. Maybe this isn't grounded. And that's what it's sitting there floating and oscillating and doing goofy shit. Excuse me. I'm getting a little grumpy. I'm getting frustrated. So I thought, well, why is that gone? So I got over here. There are two fuses over here, and I measured them, and I actually paid attention this time. And a bulb came on, not one of these bulbs, but the one in my head, which is about as equally small. Both these are positive. So what I had done, I had opened the negative side of the power supply, so I'd cut the thing off. I thought this was, you know, fused was for this side. No, it's split somehow. I need to look into it. I thought I was cutting the thing off, and I'm glad I put that paper in there because I didn't cut off the positive voltage. It really kind of ticked me off. So what I'm going to do is go have a nice sandwich and a soda and simmer down and maybe sit and read and look at the schematic again and collect my thoughts. Basically, I've gained nothing other than I proved that this IC isn't bad, and I learned something. And I learned something about the fiddliness of this. This is another one of those deals too that I don't care for this, but it's the way it is. Just get over it. These amps have no volume input control, which is fine, but make sure you shut the thing off when you plug and unplug things. And another thing I stumbled onto, I think I need to go back and think that I was looking at the bias current, and I don't think I seen it wasn't right because I didn't have a speaker hooked up. That threw me a little bit too, and then I've made a couple other dumb mistakes by hooking my meter up wrong. And this is the lesson to be learned here: is when things start going poorly, maybe you need to stop and break the cycle of screw ups. And I'm just going to be blunt about this. And you know, half of these little things are screw ups that I've made, and I'm not pleased with myself. And I don't know, maybe I'm vacuuming my soul here on television. I'm hoping this will help somebody, is what it will do. Like I said, this is a little fiddly. And you know, you start working with these transistors, you start getting that heatsink compound on there all over your hand. Although I give them credit, their insulators for this are very supple and nice. Usually they're just pieces of mica. And to be really honest, I kind of went off half-cocked on this project a little bit. At least I feel like I did. But we're making some progress. Things are shaping up, and one of the other things you got to do to do anything is you got to take this face off. You got to release these. This is rack mounted, just a standard 19-inch rack, and you got to release these. And I actually thought ahead of time and beat the rush. One of the things I don't like about this kind of stuff is, especially if it isn't mine, is when you're working on it, the potential to screw up and put a little scratch or hanger rash on something is great. You know, like this. I had to lay this face down, and yeah. Anyway, that face is held on by these rack handles, and you got to get in there and take this. This is an all anodized thing too. And I was very careful not to put my nut driver up against there and make a mark on there. That mark is there, but it's under it's more dirt than anything. And then I had to reach back here with a wrench and loosen this. And I believe somebody has worked on this, because this side that you can't see over here was very tight. This side was not, and this was adjusted out of adjustment, or it had been moved. The other thing that annoyed me about this, like I was talking about hanger rash, was you got to flip this face down to get things out of the way to work on things. Well, there's a little tiny jeweled LED here, and I can't get it to snap out of there. It may be glued into that face, and there's a very short chunk of cable, and of course there's no darn socket. Another annoying little time bomb. It appears. Oh, there is a socket for it. It's these pins. Okay, so I take that back. But it looks like you gotta fish that through there. That looks like a real pain in the butt. And I also take that back. There is a let's see what did I say. There were 5 circuit boards. There's 6. There's this. Technically, there's one on the face that runs these meters, but there's nothing there. All they are bridge rectifiers that detect or rectify the audio, and there's 2 sets of lamps on each field. So what I'm going to do is pull my horns in and sit down and use the best tool I got, which is my brain, even though it's a little rusty sometimes, and I just bang my knee. I just thought I'd take a minute and show those little time bombs to you. So you can get a laugh, and B, maybe it'll help somebody else kind of stay out of trouble. I really wish this would unplug, but it doesn't look like it's going to readily. This could be unplugged. I'm just thinking out loud here. If you want to bum along for the ride, that's fine. This is the audio input. That looks like... yeah, those could be unplugged. Maybe that's power. What is this rigmarole? This I didn't care for. This actually is funny to me. This is another reason I think somebody's been in here working. They use these push-on connectors for this is the audio output. But look at this. Now the other side is not like that, and the other side is straight. This side is all bent up. See, I think somebody's been in here jacking around, besides me. And I don't know what's what here. I think this blue one, I think, comes from the amp. I think this purple one goes to the, I want to say, the detector board, or the power out board. I don't know. It's a little fiddly. This is the stuff you're going to run into. Every one of these things is individually, or individualistic, I should say. And it makes it interesting just when you're not in a good mood. I broke one of my rules, and usually when I start getting a little grumpy, I should just walk away and go for a ride, or walk down the street, or take something to the post office and get away from the thing, and then fresh minds kick into gear. Or go enjoy the outdoors for 10 minutes. But I gotta admit, I learned from my mistakes. This fuse thing was a mistake, and I can also pass the knowledge on, which would have really been helpful years ago, before YouTube and the internet. If you're watching this, you've been given a gift you don't really understand, maybe, which is somebody's documenting this, even though it may not be perfect. 20 years ago, you had to kind of learn some of this stuff the hard way. And that's why people specialized a little bit. You got places that just work on this kind of stuff, or work on amp. This is our guy that he only works on the gas stuff. I can't remember what that was the other day I worked on. It was very grumpy and very frustrating. I think it was a Carver amp. It was very fiddly and very... I think you had to really shift the old brain box into low and think about each step real carefully. To be really honest, I honestly expected this to be some corrosion problem. I thought maybe, something like that. And I still don't know why this is not drawing any current. It's... I don't know. It's got me scratching my head. A quick way to find out what's going on. Well, I kind of did. Not the output transistors, not this little integrated circuit array that you can't see because I'm too lazy to move the camera, which is good. If this was easily detachable, maybe a swap. But I always worry about stuff like that. If you swap swap the wrong direction, you may suddenly have two bad stages, and that's what I thought had happened to me before. Okie dokie. So I'm going to take a little break here and collect my thoughts and maybe test this other side again, so I'm feeling better about that now. I can't figure out what somebody's done to this. They adjusted this to cover up a problem. The other thing I need to do is I need to talk to the customer. They kind of just threw this at me and said fix it, and I'm going to take responsibility, and I didn't ask any questions. I'm just testing this. I need to find out if they'd taken this somewhere else, if anybody knows anything. That's something else I discovered here too. Sorry, this is a little discombobulated. And I checked these just for fun. There are some very small transistors up here, but they're in an IC socket. And I kind of scoochied those around to make sure there wasn't some corrosion. That's a Tektronix trick. Tektronix used to socket a lot of their oscilloscopes, and especially up toward the deflection plate. Sometimes they get a little corrosion there, and you get these funky patterns. And you spend weeks testing the thing only to find out it's a damnable socket. Well, I think in retrospect, I should have sat down and looked this over very carefully and started at the beginning. There is some thermal cutouts in here. I'm just kind of showing you this stuff while I'm here. It's buried. You can't see it. It's buried under there. It's kind of weird. I think you'd have to really warm this baby up for them thermal cutouts unless they're very low. I don't know, I'm going to explore the internet a little bit more and see if I can find some stuff, but I just thought I'd pass that on to you. That's interesting. I'm not sure how those caps are held in there. I assume that they might be screw mounted to the bottom of that board, but I don't see how you get that board out without a fight. There is an army of plugged-in, these little plug-ins go clear across there. Man, there is a lot of stuff in there. Why is that so complicated? Oh, I think a lot of this stuff is the transformer plugging into the circuit board. And then, like I said, I think there are multiple power supplies on here. Okay, what do we got here? Well, there are 4 bridge. Well, no, I take that back. There are. Is that per side? Looks like there are 3 bridge rectifiers. There are three windings. 1 with a center tap, which has got to be the big power amp winding. That's 45 volts. It looks like there's a 51 volt power supply. I don't know what that runs. It must run some drivers and stuff. And then there's a 28 volt plus and minus. Everything's plus and minus. And that's how I got. I didn't look at the pluses and minuses when I started jacking around over here and I took those fuses out. Okie dokie. I'm gonna let you scoot. And so you can go get a towel or whatever, or a paper towel, and clean up whatever you were drinking and spilled on yourself from laughing at my mistakes. It's a comedy of errors. I think I've seen this once in a Marx Brothers movie or Three Stooges. But to be realistic, I'm not the only one that ever has issues with these things. I'm probably one of the few that ever documents them and confesses up to my mistakes. Oh, I feel better already. Grumpy piece of junk. Well, anyway, take her easy. Have a great day.